Welcome. Welcome to the Game Audio Hour number 98. This is a weekly podcast where we discuss all things game audio, from creative ideas to the latest techniques, project experiences to audio secrets. Here's where you'll find in-depth coverage and opinions related to game audio. So, guys, it's been a little while. I think we had GDC last week, and before that we had the special Aston Microphones episode, which I was fast asleep for because it was like 3 a.m. in the morning here. You guys in your daylight saving time. Actually, speaking of daylight saving time, it's a good thing that I checked in this morning because I would have been 1 hour late. It's all to do with the imperial system and Fahrenheit and inches and stuff like that, but I don't really get. But anyway, Vince, how are you?
I'm doing all right. I'm actually just getting used to this daylight savings time because daylight savings time hit the day before GDC, and GDC itself just wrecks everyone's schedule. So I didn't really understand the effect of daylight savings time until I got back to LA from San Francisco.
Jet lagged. Oh my God, it's like 1 hour. I can't sleep.
It's weird, the lights coming in through the window, and you're like, wait a minute, what? Should I be going to work yet? What? Huh? I don't know.
That's good. Keeps you on your toes. Just like, speaking of being on your toes, ready for anything, the man of action. It's Michael Gordon Shapiro. How are you?
I'm doing just great. And for the benefit of our listeners who are in London or New Delhi or Luxembourg, if you'd like to know what it's like to have to switch to and from daylight savings time at odd points during the year, just imagine that you're always tired and you're always late for everything. That's a pretty good simulation.
The story of my life. The story of my life. So, let's see. GDC. It was last week. Sadly, I wasn't able to be at GDC. Oh, wait, before we go further, we should just apologize for the absence of our gregarious, magnanimous, spectacularly infamous... help me out, Mike. More adjectives. More adjectives.
Deleterious, delirious.
Did I say gregarious?
Splendiferous.
Infrequently serious.
Host, Carl Johnson, who is sadly a little busy with some other matters right now. But never mind, the three of us are going to hold the show with a chat room full of thousands of eager participants. So it's great to see everybody here. Thanks for joining in. Now, let's talk about GDC. So I wasn't able to make it this year. What did I miss, guys?
Ooh, what did you miss? You missed me talk. I actually had a little bit of a talk. We did some audio micro talks, and I was there along with a bunch of other people. So you missed me on a stage talking about fighting games and music notation and dance notation and all sorts of stuff for about 6 minutes.
Fantastic fighting games.
I thought it was actually pretty good.
Actually, fighting games. Let's put a pin in that one and talk a little bit about a certain fighting game later on in today's show. So we'll just put a note in that one for later. But who else was in that audio micro talk with you, Vince?
Oh man, let's see. There were quite a few. Dren McDonald actually organized it, and there were 9 other people. Kristen Queeby, Karen Collins, who we actually had as a guest here on the show a while back. Ariel Gross, Simon Olsen. Let's see. Kristen's at Riot Games. Simon Olsen was known for Device 6.
Oh, yeah.
Just some wonderful sound designers. And it was really great to talk about things that were not necessarily about sound design. Like I talked about music notation and fighting games, but how it also informs us into how we design the sound that we do. It was a really cool talk, I think.
Did you have many people come to watch and listen?
Yeah, it was pretty good. It was a pretty good showing for the first ever of the audio micro talks. I think there were, it's hard to say, like 60, 70 people there. It was a pretty good showing.
What day and time slot was that, Vince?
Oh, that was Wednesday at 11. So another thing about this year's GDC was that so many audio things were scheduled concurrent with each other. So I was going up against, well, not I, but me and everyone else on the Audio Micro Talks. There were 2 other really big audio things that were happening at that time. And, of course, I couldn't go to them. Actually, in the hour immediately after that, there were some more audio things happening. Will Roget was talking about orchestration. It was a AAA virtual orchestration on a budget. That was the talk, and it was a very informative talk. But that was scheduled right next to Martin Stig Anderson talking about audio design for Inside, which is the game that Playdead is doing after Limbo. Like, how do I choose between these two things? Oh, so that happens so many times during the GDC week. As long as it is, a whole week of all this stuff, you find yourself missing all these things and can be a little bit frustrating. But it was still very fun, and hey, I was able to at least talk to them before and after, and they would give me the rundown on all the cool stuff that I missed.
Mm, that's cool. The going to GDC for if you're in audio is such a fantastic thing. If you don't live in the States, I can definitely recommend saving up the money through the year so that you can buy yourself a ticket out to GDC in February or March or whenever it is, because when you come from overseas, it's definitely worthwhile. Especially for audio, somehow like the sense of community is really, really strong with audio people, and have that regular lunches behind the carousel next to Moscone West, is it, or somewhere there? Which Damien Kussbauer is kind of the MC of that, I guess. And you've got that Game Audio GDC hashtag on Twitter that's always got like loads of activities and stuff happening, and people meeting up and discussions. And then there's the Sight Glass coffee shop meetings in the morning, I think it was, and there's just like so much great stuff to do and great people to mix with. Did any particular highlights for you, Mike?
There were a couple, although as always I missed out of a big chunk of GDC due to being busy with meetings. That's my tragedy, is I missed about half of the talks for that reason. And there was also, as Vince said, a lot of really good talks that were back-to-back competing against each other. I think I remember seeing the audio microtalk session and really wanting to go to it, but if memory serves, Winifred Phillips might have had a talk at the same slot, or there was something else that was really cool, and I, of course, didn't know that Vince was one of the Audio Talks speakers, which would have, of course, immediately diverted me to that session. What did I think was cool? There were a lot of nuts and bolts talks that I think were very useful from the standpoint of sharing composer techniques. Jason Graves gave a really cool, really interesting talk on composing for multiplayer games and how you handle the scenario where you've got players competing against each other in a PvP scenario, and the different sides, the different factions, need different musical experiences of the same events. So that was a really informative talk on that subject. I saw there was a lot of presence, or maybe I should say premonition, of VR in the air at GDC this year, though I don't think there was any one demo that convinced everybody that the future is here. I think the consensus was the future is on its way, and we're not quite sure how it's going to manifest.
Yeah, tell me about it.
One thing I did see that was cool, although a little bit outside of the realm of game audio per se, was a demonstration of a VR short, or really a lecture and partial demonstration of a VR short called, it was either called Henry the Hedgehog, or it might have just been called Henry, though Henry was in fact a hedgehog, by Oculus Story Studios. And what you were basically looking at was a Pixar-esque short film about a little hedgehog who wanted to reach out and I think hug people, and he's all spiny, so he can't do that effectively. And you're looking at a scene with him at home, and I think the experience was to be akin to being inside of a Pixar short. You're seeing a narrative, and you have control over position and camera angle. It's kind of like being in the room with the characters, and I think the idea is that this is distinctly more interesting than just watching a 3D cutscene where you can move the camera around. There's a sense of really being part of the world as opposed to being a camera that you can quasi-control. That was probably the most compelling demonstration of VR that I saw, and one of the more interesting discussions on the audio implications. On that note, there was, I don't think there was any shocks for anyone, but there were some interesting points to the effect that there's a real differentiation between in-world sound, or what's sometimes called diegetic sound, sound that's coming from something in the world, and narrative sound, which of course includes music. And one way this distinction comes to fore is decisions about sonic placement. If you're listening to an album, maybe it's a quad album, or if you're going to a film, maybe they're doing funky things with spatial placement of different stems of audio, and your soloist sounds like it's coming from the balcony, and the kick drum is coming from the left part of the theater, etc. And as soon as you enter the VR space, where sound positioning information is vital for understanding where things are in the world around you, suddenly you want to get very conservative about your music mixing. And I suspect with VO as well, because if you're suddenly spreading out your music spatially in the room, you start to ask yourself, well, am I supposed to be standing amongst the instruments of the band that's playing the music for this world? So there are interesting discussions of topics like that.
Right.
And although I don't think we would have been stunned by any revelations, it's interesting to hear people think through those problems that are going to become very common as VR becomes more common.
Yeah, that's precisely the challenges that I'm dealing with the PlayStation VR game that we're working on at VT Backroom right now. Is how much what aspects should not be three-dimensional? What aspects should be just basic stereo? In our case, the game is called Modern Zombie Taxi Company. And in our case, you are placed inside a taxi, and the music that you hear is coming from a car radio. Oh, look at that. Vince, say something so that the camera will switch to you. Actually, I can do it here, can't I? He's muted. There we go. Look at...
You must play the Modern Zombie Taxi Company. Play it when it comes out later this year.
Thanks, Vince. Yes, but it's been very challenging with that game in particular because, VR game design is so different and it's so difficult because many of the things that you want to do with a VR game to differentiate it from just sitting looking at a flat screen on the two-dimensional surface in front of you, the things that you want to do to differentiate it from that traditional experience are specific things that we now know will cause a lot of people to become nauseous. So it's sort of walking a very, very fine line between trying to make it interesting as a VR thing in itself, but still obviously keeping it within the bounds that it doesn't make people throw up. And the really hard part is that just like car sickness and seasickness, simulation sickness, of course, it depends entirely on the person. And so it's really hard to get sort of hard and fast data. This does not make people sick, or this does unequivocally make everybody sick. It's really hard. And so it comes down to sort of a, well, it doesn't make that many people sick, so I guess we can do that. Finding that kind of data right now is really, really challenging, and that's why game design in VR is really, really difficult. So that's game design, but then come on to audio design for VR, and that's, that's subtly difficult. Like you could sort of say, especially with the great middleware tools that we have these days, you can easily get by with just a very basic three-dimensional implementation of your sound thanks to Fmod or Wise, or the kind of thing that you would use if you were doing some kind of first-person game, like a first-person shooter or something. A lot of those techniques transfer. And then, of course, units like the PlayStation VR have their proprietary binaural processing, which is pretty good. It works, It works. It sounds good. Well, actually, I wouldn't say it sounds good, but it sounds realistic. Things definitely, it feels very different from just a stereo simulation of a 3D environment. But yeah, that said, it does sound very different. So mixing things becomes very challenging then, because it's a distinctive sound to that. So then, where to actually deal with music it's a big issue. In our case, it's a little bit simpler because you're in a car, and if you sit in your own car and turn on the radio to a decent volume and then turn your head around, there's not that it's because a car is such a small little acoustic environment. Everything bounces around so much that you don't notice too drastically that you are moving your head inside, a stereo field. So we can sort of get away with it, but in other games, like for example, open worldish kind of games, or with larger stages where the player is, it's a new and very challenging field.
Alex, let me ask this. In the case you were describing, is the music in the car supposed to be source music, or does it also function as quasi-score?
What do you mean by source music?
Is it just music coming out of a physical radio that is part of the world of the game, or does it also do double duty as sort of traditional score that's not coming from any source in the world?
No, it comes out of the car radio.
Are you able to tell the difference, given the particular acoustic setup you've got, that you're actually listening to a car radio that's incidental music and that's not supposed to be score?
Yes, because being a car radio, we've got DJ,
chatter.
What are they called? Not chatters. What do they call those? Radio FM 80.2, that kind of thing.
Station identification.
What?
I call them bumpers.
Bumpers, is that the industry term?
Yeah. I believe so.
We've got a few of those in there to make it seem, more obvious that this is actually the radio that you're listening to. And then the radio will duck out every now and then when there's sort of cue music, like you get a power up or something, or there's some kind of event that needs to be triggered. Then the radio will duck out and give priority to that music, and then the radio comes back in again.
There's an interesting issue that I'm thinking about. So there's a technique you sometimes see in film and more often in TV, where there'll be some in-world source of music, like characters at a bar and they're watching an act, or someone turns on the radio, and as the scene goes forward, the music that starts out as source is promoted to score, so that we'll cut away from the bar, we'll cut away from whatever we're looking at to another scene, or on TV maybe a montage of scenes, and the music that we were just listening from the bar continues. So it's no longer tied to the environment. And I think that's pretty easy to do in film and TV because you have such control over the mix, and you don't have to pin that music in the bar with a lot of spatial cues. But in a game, I'm wondering now how you would handle that special condition where you're trying to morph from one use of music to another. Would you just suddenly take a spatially positioned piece of music and then throw it in a stereo and just say, well, that's the transition you're going to have to deal with as we make this swap? Or would you slide the fader gradually so that it would make this transition to being unspatial, non-3D over 2 seconds? Or it's interesting to think of how that would work.
I think because because a player's movement is a bit more unpredictable in VR, not as unpredictable as like a first-person simulation kind of game, like a first-person shooter, where the player can actually go anywhere. In a lot of the cases with the VR games, movement needs to be treated very, very carefully because that's one of the triggers that will make people throw up. Or as we say at Vitae, that is rather chunderous. So that means that if you sort of have a radio that's sitting on, like say you're in a living room and there's a little radio, and the idea is that the player is supposed to leave the living room, and then the music that was on the radio turns into score music. Actually, having the player leave the room, you need to sort of find some way to do that in a seamless way that isn't too chunderous, And so that's why a lot of the VR games we're finding are basically, you're sitting in a chair, or maybe a chair that's moving, like you're in a vehicle, but basically, the idea is to reduce the simulation sickness, to make sure that the manifestation of the player in the game is as close to what the actual player will physically be doing when they're playing the game, which of course, in 99% of the time is sitting down in a chair. And so that movement to begin with means that doing something like converting from source to score is going to be, from a game design point of view, there's a challenge there. Secondly, actually going from source to score, if you have a situation where you don't know when the player is going to do that, then I guess the challenges are probably arguably a little bit more challenging if this was like a first-person simulation kind of game on like a traditional one, because in that situation you don't know when the player's going to leave. They may stand there listening to the radio for ages before they leave. In a VR situation, probably the act of leaving that room and leaving that source and having that source move away is going to be something that's going to be dictated by the game design, less so than because the character suddenly decides that they want to move now. But yeah, I think it depends on the game. I would argue that doing that is equally, if not more, difficult in a traditional first person viewpoint kind of game.
Well,
yeah. Gee, we kind of deviated away from GDC, haven't we?
Yeah. I just thinking, this was the first time that they had GDC and VRDC, Virtual Reality Developers Conference, and they had a whole separate track of VR sessions, and I got to check out some VR audio sessions, and I got excited about ambisonic recording and different things there. And a lot of people talking about this year being the year of virtual reality. I honestly can't wait for next year, just because all this stuff is going to be finally available in consumers' hands this year, and we will have found out a whole lot more about what the general population wants, what the general population needs, all the different crazy things that people are trying, the weird fixes, the crazy hacks, the surprising successes. A year from now, I really can't wait for GDC next year, because I think that's going to be really the year of VRDC, where a huge amount of learning is going to be happening. Right now, it's like, even now, it's still, with all the talks that I went to, very much, a whole lot of spitballing, and everyone sort of developing within their own small spaces. But in GDC, if it's really about anything, it's about learning, and I think we're going to learn a whole lot more about VR next year.
Yeah, I agree with that. VR, I think it's wonderful and it's amazing, and it's very significant technology. Right now, though, there's so much unknown, and there's developing for it is so difficult because there's so much unknown. And if it was a sort of a game genre that had no physical implication on the player, then it would be, let's go for it. Just do what you like, and let's go crazy. However, in this case, all VR developers are limited by a very, very definite barrier, which is that if you don't do it well, people will throw up. Actually, maybe not as bad as throw up, but people will get sick. I'm a bit sort of overdosed on VR because I have to work with it all the time, and my tolerance is pretty good for it. But yeah, after like about 20 minutes, you start to feel, okay, it's time to take this thing off now. If the sweat, it doesn't make you take it off earlier. Usually, it's interesting when you're playing a VR game. It's great for like 20 minutes. It really hits you when you take it off. It's like, whoa, okay, all right, okay, got to just sort of stay still for a little while now and listen to some sounds of forests and whale calls and birds and sounds for a while. Yeah, but I agree. I think this year is it's groundbreaking, and it's wonderful and it's exciting. But probably the next 2-3 years is when we're going to see the more of the really, really exciting artistic stuff.
Yeah. Hey, Michael, were there any specific talks that you saw that really struck you, that you thought, whoa, that's pretty cool, that there's a really cool thing that's happening there, whether it be audio or something else?
Well, I did touch upon a couple of the talks that I thought were interesting, Jason Graves and the demonstration of Henry. One talk I really like every year that unfortunately I only got to very briefly sample is the Experimental Games Workshop. And for the benefit of those of you who haven't been there, this is I believe, 4-hour talk or session, usually Friday afternoon, and you can sit down after lunch and basically spend the rest of GDC there. And it's a succession of games that are all in some way beyond the pale or interesting or experimental. Just in some aspect of them is very unusual. And it's a lot of fun, and it can be educational with giving this sense of giving you a glimpse of a trend that may happen in the future. I believe Fez came out of that workshop and may have been demonstrated there a number of years ago. Sadly, I only had time to swing by for about half an hour. I did see a couple of cool games demonstrated. One was called Floor Kids, and it was a breakdancing game for mobile platforms where you use your fingers to basically make gestures on the screen, and that translates into dance moves. So there's a little bit of kind of an analog experience between your skill in moving your hand or fingers and the deftness of the dancer on screen. I think it's a little more interesting than if you're using a joystick where pushing a button on a D-pad or a tiny analog joystick is not as directly comparable as actually dragging your finger across the screen. So that looked like a cool game, and you can go to the web, just Google Floor Kids, and you'll quickly see the site demonstrating the game. There was another neat-looking kind of abstract action puzzle game called Simple Circles, and that can be found, I believe, at simple-circles.com, kind of old-school URL. And from what I could tell, it was a series of puzzles in which every element on screen was some kind of circle. So you were probably moving around a little circle, and there were circles on the screen, and how you had to interact with them seems to be redefined every level. So there's a common visual motif, but the rules are constantly changing, and that looked pretty cool. Obviously, the first of these two games had more of an audio element than the second, but that's just what I happened to see this time around.
Cool. Yeah, that's it's reminiscent of the Sense of Wonder night at Tokyo Game Show. It's sort of also in that same, although I think the GDC version is much more experimental. The Sense of Wonder night tends to be just more about kind of kooky slapstick, the idea is supposed to be that, if it makes you think, whoa, wow, then it's good, which is sort of less about, progressive, artistic endeavors in game design. So we should take a little break here, the halfway point, to thank our marvelous sponsor, Isotope, for sponsoring the show. As always, it's a pleasure and an honor to be sponsored by such a prestigious, notable audio-ware vendor. Vince, have you had any Isotope smile moments this last 3 weeks?
Oh man, I don't know if they're smile moments because it was kind of tough. Well, more like annoying work, but it's amazing how simple it is these days. Lately I've been having to do some quick VO work, and it's really useful for that. Mostly getting matching this voice actor that was doing some pickup lines from his own house with a totally different setup, getting that to match with the stuff that was done in the original studio. Yeah, Isotope is really fantastic for a lot of that stuff. I mean, I honestly can't imagine having to do all that stuff with all the old tools that I had, where you could do it, it would just be that much slower. But now it's just, okay, give me an hour this weekend, sure, I can get it done. So yeah, thank you, Isotope.
Thank you.
Was that with Vince? Were you using Ozone for that?
I was actually using RX5 and just doing some things in there because I had it open. I'm just gonna throw this in there. I figured out a batch routine that I can do with that. And it worked out great.
Regular viewers will, of course, be aware that if you watch the Game Audio Hour religiously, roughly around once a month we do a giveaway where we give away one of Isotope's marvelous products. And the next giveaway, I believe, is going to be in 2 weeks. Would that be right? Because if you look at the number show, we are actually at number 98. And so to celebrate our centennial, is that right?
Something like that. 100th? Yeah, that works.
Centennial episode 100, amazing. Episode 100. We need Kyle here so that we can have a virtual screen hug. Anyway, for episode 100, we are going to be lining up our next giveaway, so please be sure to check out that. Now, so there's a bit of an elephant in the room, doing some kung fu over in the corner, and I'd like to talk to you guys a little bit about a game that I've been playing a fair bit, which is Street Fighter V, Capcom's latest opus in their legendary Street Fighter franchise. And Vince. So actually, the reason that we're talking about this, and after this, we're going to seamlessly segue into a little bit of middleware discussion about the middleware that quite a lot of Japanese games and Japanese game audio people are getting into these days, which probably, I don't know for sure if it was used in Street Fighter V, but we'll get into that later on. But first, Street Fighter V, have you, now Vince, you're our resident connoisseur of all things fighting game. Let's lay it down. Take the gloves off.
And Street Fighter V is a good game. It really is. I just don't like playing it that much. No, I mean it is a really good game. It's really quite well crafted. They obviously spent a long time balancing it and making it ready for competitive play. That's what's so important with these games. It's not just about the mainstream audience that could enter the fray with this game, but about esports now and competitive players and professional players and sponsored players, and it's really quite a well-balanced game. It's quite good that. It just doesn't feel good to me, and that's all right. In terms of the controller feel and what I'm actually doing with the controller.
That's interesting. Myself, I think Vince will know that because we've just talked about this before on our long walks in downtown Osaka. I'm firmly of the Virtua Fighter school. So actually, to me, as like a Virtua Fighter player, Street Fighter V actually feels really good because I think it's like a very charged up, high pace, sort of silly, ridiculous, dramatic version of Virtua Fighter. Of course, the way you control and the moves are completely different, and your tactics will be very different, and just the way that you approach playing it will be very different. And often when I have to switch between the two, although I don't play Virtua Fighter, I play a Virtua Fighter character in Dead or Alive on the PlayStation 4. But when you have to switch between the two, it can be a little bit jarring, kind of difficult. But as far as tuning, like the feel of it, it's interesting. I guess, yeah, it really depends on your pedigree, because for me, I find Street Fighter V feels great. But we're not here to talk so much about the game. We're here to talk about the audio. What's your feeling about the audio in Street Fighter V, Vince?
It feels a little weird to me, I got to admit. I mean, I think it sounds overall pretty good, but some of the things that I listen for are not quite the way that I would expect. Let's see. I'm not a huge fan of the whoosh sounds that are in there. So the sounds of whiffed attacks, and it feels a little bit weird to me how exactly those whiffs actually connect with the animations, because it seems like sometimes the whiff sounds actually occur a little bit late relative to the animation. Like, oh, you punch, and then once the hitbox is out there. Once the hurt box is out there, only then is when you actually hear the whoosh that comes. On the other hand, when it actually connects and the attacking player is actually on that extended punch hurt box for an extended period of time, because the animation actually changes speed when it hits versus when it whiffs, then you actually hear the whoosh there, and then it connects into the hit sound that comes after that. So that's when I first heard that, it felt like a very interesting choice to me. It didn't quite feel like what I expected. After a while, I got used to it because compared to a lot of other games, all those whiff sounds actually are mixed rather low, which is all right. There are some games where you're doing a lot of whiffing in order to gauge the range, but I guess that's actually a little bit less the case in this game, where you're being a lot more offensive, I think, than in Street Fighter 4. But it's just it's different. I think I'll get used to it after a while. It's it's always tough with fighting games because these sounds are made to be heard thousands of times, not tens or hundreds of times, but really thousands and thousands of times. And I think I'll really have a good, strong, educated opinion on the Street Fighter V sound design a month or two later compared to what I'm showing you right now.
I think for me, I'm too busy actually playing the game to sort of be able to listen analytically to. If I had somebody else playing it and I could just watch and really listen, then maybe. But I'm always sort of, it's so intense. It's sort of too busy sort of playing it to actually sit and concentrate about what I'm hearing. One thing I will say, and I'm literally placing my head on the chopping block by saying this, considering the company that I'm in and also the viewers who watch, but I'm really not a fan of the music, and that kind of counts for, I'm sorry, I got to say it, but most Capcom games. I think
most Capcom games.
I don't know that. I don't know. It might be. It's got to be, my background, I guess, because with the Commodore Amiga, music was all sort of very demo scene, and so I think. That's kind of what I'm used to really enjoying when I play a game, like sort of strong melodies, sort of simple stripped-down arrangements, very stylistically pure, just simply because of the technical limitations of the hardware. But I don't know that. Yeah, I don't know. It's just what's the it's really what's the best. Maybe it's intentional that the music has no real. This is really difficult because I know I'm treading on very, 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 very thin ice. But if you asked me to hum the melody to any of the songs in Street Fighter V, I wouldn't be able to do it. I just thought, it's kind of like a mixture of guitars and like oddball kind of genre snippets from here and there, and sort of all just sort of kind of wobbles along in the background, and you don't really sort of notice it or hear it.
Right.
And maybe that's intentional. Maybe it's designed to kind of give a sort of a bed, like a noise floor, and just sort of give you that sense of vibrancy and activity. Because Japanese games and Japanese arts, they're very good at creating that sort of sense of vibrancy. If you look at pretty much any Japanese website, sadly, still they're still about 20 years behind, but they've sort of gone. Web design in Japan has gone into a different direction where it's all just about trying to make it look like a supermarket, sale
circular
catalog. Where it's just like bang, and you've got sort of this sort of so much stuff happening. So maybe it's sort of the sonic equivalent of that. It's sort of a noise floor of just sort of going like this, but you don't really kind of pick up on melodies, and you don't really pick up on sort of hooks or sort of strong motives to sort of, to sort of connect with. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe it could be just me, and probably is because of course there are a lot of dedicated fans of Capcom's music, and of course the music in all of the Street Fighter games. But am I crazy?
Well, I think that also connects to that idea of making music that you're potentially listening to hundreds and thousands of times. If I was writing music for a cinematic, that's certainly different from if I'm writing music for a level. Level 1, level 5, and then depending on the game genre. If I was writing music that I know has to be listened to literally 1,000 times by not just a few players, but actually the players that you care most about, those hardcore professional fighting game players, I wonder if I would shy away from making extremely strong melodies. I'm just thinking if I was, I would still be thinking melodically. I care a lot about melodies, but I probably wouldn't start the level with it. Okay, that character intros, I'm probably not going to put like a trumpet right up front blasting out the theme. I probably wouldn't put a synth out front blasting out the theme. Maybe there should be a theme in there, but maybe bury that in there for when all that other sound effect stuff is actually happening in the middle.
I think that's a good point. I think in the case of Street Fighter, and in the case of taking into consideration the professional players, I'd be surprised. I don't know, but I'd be kind of surprised if there are that many professional players who actually play it with the music on. I would sort of imagine that those people, those guys and girls at that level, would probably want to switch the music off so that they can hear the sound effects more precisely, because I'm sure they take timing cues and stuff from that as well. I mean, amazing, aren't they? These people, 60 frames per second, they can count them for you. It's like it's amazing.
Yeah, and so the sound effects, I think they're pretty good. I mean, I'm not sure if I would do the design for them the way that they did, but I do appreciate the differentiation between the types of hits that they've got. So your bounce attacks and your normal attacks. However, I probably would have done even more differentiation of the sound effects between your weak, medium, and strong for trying to hit confirm off of them. I think those are actually really important sounds, but actually between the normal hit sparks, it doesn't seem like the sounds are all that different to me. I would have loved a little bit more differentiation there. Now, between all the stuff that happens when you're V-triggered and for critical arts, I think there are some really cool sound effects there. So yeah.
I think interestingly with Street Fighter V, they are making a little bit more of that interesting aspect that you get with fighting games, where the sounds become so disconnected with physically what is actually happening. That's always been the thing with fighting games. With Hollywood movies are a good example as well. A punch sound is not actually what it sounds like when you hit somebody. And not that I'd know from experience, of course, but with Street Fighter V, it seems that they've taken liberties to stretch it out even further. Like a lot of the kicks and the sort of rapid fire kind of moves sound, they've clearly just used like gun samples for a lot of them. The sort of chunky little bits of debris coming out when you hit it, sort of making it very trying to go for that kind of aggressive feeling with having all of this sort of detail and grit and sort of militaristic kind of armament tones, which is very interesting. I think a lot of the other games, at least that I can recall, have more are slightly closer to. They're either just very abstract, but they're usually less reminiscent of a specific thing. Oh, that's not the sound of somebody kicking. That is the sound of this. Whereas in Street Fighter V, it seems that they've kind of moved in that direction a bit more, where it's clearly something else. It fits and it works and it's exciting, but it's an interesting sort of that they're deviating more and more and more away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. What was I going to say? About for this kind of game, having a strong melody. Chase actually in the chat room. One of our beloved regular viewers, Chase Bethia, has just commented that I think he said his brother, his friend, is a semi-professional fighting game player, and he normally plays with the music off. Personally, I think if you have this kind of situation where the player will need to listen to that same piece of music over and over and over and over again, I think if it were me, I might be tempted to experiment with going the opposite direction and making real sort of earwormish kind of catchy melodies, not to pull the player's attention away from what they're doing, but in the case of a fighting game, for people who aren't professional players who are probably going to turn the music off anyway, you really want to promote that sense of sort of excitement and just sort of that that visceral feeling, that tense feeling when you're playing a fighting game. And I think having even music that has such a strong presence that you probably wouldn't really notice anyway because you're concentrating on the game, lifting that presence up with a strong, catchy melody, I think might be something interesting to experiment. That's probably what I would do. Not that I'm that good at making strong, catchy melodies, but what did you do in the case of Skullgirls, Vince?
Oh, well, I mean, we definitely did a lot of stuff with melodies, but we also made the music very, very long. A lot of the pieces of music are actually 3.5, 4 minutes long, and that went well with what we wanted for the rhythm of the matches to be like. Street Fighter V, most stuff ends relatively quickly, but
Mm.
actually in Skullgirls, it's possible to have rounds last 4 or 5 minutes long before actually, oh, are you going to play again? Are you going to rematch? That's just the way that the energy drain went.
Mm.
Uh, so we ended up doing that. We liked having these strong melodies. We liked having like these big harmonic progressions. We liked having these really big sections of the music that people could actually latch onto.
Mm.
People would say, "Oh yeah, that's a particularly good part of the music at the 2.5 minute mark or something," um, and yeah, we went for it. The music was actually a big part of what we wanted for the game, in addition to the fighting games, the actual fighting mechanics themselves. So
Mm.
we cared a lot about it, and we wanted people to listen to and enjoy the music.
Mm.
I think there's an argument to be made that in this kind of button mashing fighting game, particularly when it's two human beings playing each other, there is much less of a sense of atmosphere and much more of just wanting to pump up the adrenaline.
Mm.
And I think you could get away with just playing pop music in the same sense that it would be high intensity, high energy, and even if there's a literal melody being sung by a human being, it wouldn't distract you in the same way that it would be if you were playing like an open world game where you had a strongly defined character. I mean, these are almost like a step away from being like table hockey or those other strictly physical competitive games. And I think this is the case where the rules of game music don't apply as strongly. You can get away with it in your face melody.
Mm. If
Yeah,
go ahead, Vince.
it does depend on the fighting game. Like there are many fighting games where I think it does a pretty good job of matching that. Hey, this is just general intensity pumping music. I'm thinking of Dead or Alive right now,
Yeah.
and the game itself is actually among the more button mashy games. It's much more casual. People are able to enter into the game very easily because it has a 3 button scheme instead of a 6 button scheme. It doesn't have too many complicated movements. You're just really going at it, and they want to actually create. Hey, yes, it's intense. It's fun. We're just going at it, mano a mano.
Mm.
And some other games like Street Fighter V, it's not quite at that level musically, where it's just I think that there are melodies and themes, but they're just not quite to the extent of say previous Street Fighter games or other fighting games like Guilty Gear, another game that places a strong focus on the music as well. But it does have sort of a deliberate rhythm to it compared to games like Dead or Alive, and I think that also reflects what is the desired input from the player. The stuff that's going on screen might be very frenetic, but in terms of the actual movements that are happening on the controller in Street Fighter versus something like Dead or Alive, I think the movements are actually much more calculated, much more deliberate. And I think the music does sort of instantiate that difference as well.
That's interesting, actually, because I would have said the opposite. Because Street Fighter in general is, I would have said the easiest game to get into because you don't get so many, like with the Dead or Alive or Virtua Fighter style games, moves will be kind of compact units of combinations of controls, like backwards forwards punch or forwards kick or forwards kick or kick punch together or stuff like that. Whereas in Street Fighter, there's less of that sort of forward punch kind of stuff and more just chaining together combinations of very simple commands like medium punch, medium kick together, or the one, of course, exception is five, like the roll things and the Shoryuken kind of that style. So you can basically, if you sit down, if you watch somebody who's never played Street Fighter before, and it's like, oh my god, I'm in a fighting game, so they'll just sort of do this, and that actually kind of works a lot of times because you've got 6 buttons for all 6 different things that your player can do, and every button triggers them. So everybody triggers something different, and if you're just sort of doing that with a joystick because you think you're in a fighting game and you've got to do something, it can actually work. It doesn't work so well on a controller, of course, because you don't have that dexterity with your thumb. But in the case of like Virtua Fighter or Dead or Alive, they're more sort of, you know, just sort of a little move here and a little move there, and sort of like this, as opposed to sort of like this. So if you go and try and button mash something like Dead or Alive or Virtua Fighter, you just sort of make the character sort of jiggle, not really do anything. So I don't know. I've always found it interesting that people who've never really played fighting games before, it's really easy for them to get into Street Fighter, which is testimony to its, you know, its legacy and its fame and its quality as a fighting game, I guess. Anyway, before we finish up the show, I just wanted to drop in a mention. Now, Vince, you were talking about a middleware solution, something other than Wise and Fmod that our viewers might be interested in hearing about, something that's rather popular with the Japanese developers.
Yeah, so I guess a little bit of a preamble. You know, besides all the lectures at GDC, there are also various vendors that are showing off their wares, especially middlewares and tools. Obviously, the big audio middlewares are things that you may already be familiar with. Fmod, Wise, also Fabric and Master Audio for Unity. There were some interesting things out there. Let's see, Tasman Audio and Fabric. I think they're going to be doing a native code middleware instead of just being a plugin for Unity, so that people who are doing projects outside of Unity can do that stuff. And then also, a lot of people were asking about one of the vendors at the GDC Expo floor, which was CRI Middleware. Who is this company? They seem to be doing some really cool stuff with audio and video. They've actually been around for a long time. They're very popular among Japanese developers, especially Japanese developers making music games. I actually tried some early versions of their software with English documentation, and I would say that it is really, really good. It's a really good tool. It has some really nice ways of some really nice design features. It has very good codecs at its disposal, very good performance. I would say probably some of the best performance if you just care about quality of their codecs, you know, for compressing and playback of files, and has very good profiling. It's just not Fmod or Wise because they're a Japanese developer, and for the last decade or so, actually more than that, I would say close to 2 decades now, they have been focused very much on the Japanese market. But actually the CRI guys, they're mostly ex-Sega guys that decided to spin off some of their tools, and you can sometimes see the old ADX logo on things from Sega titles from the late 90s. It's actually quite good. They're new to us in the Western world, but not that new. They've been around for a while, and they have a very good tool out there.
Yeah, having a look up here on the, I'm just looking at the their Wikipedia page. You might be interested to know that they started off as a game developer in the 90s with some pretty cool titles that they've done. Galaxy Force, Afterburner 3, they did Virtual On. Wow.
Yeah, they did a lot of stuff with Sega.
Wow, I didn't know. I thought Virtual On was AM2.
Well, many individuals were absorbed into that.
Wow, and they've anyway. So moving down, Cryware. So it is a Japanese game company. Originally a Japanese game company, and then shifted in 2001 to developing middleware. And mostly prior to that, looks like a steady relationship with Sega, as you said, Vince. So Genesis games, Sega Saturn, and Dreamcast. Interesting. So what reasons would somebody choose this over one of the the elder statesmen of the Western middleware market like Fmod or Wise?
Well, so I think one of the big things that they were pushing while on the expo floor was that they were showing their timing with their audio system, just showing videos, demos of how exact the timing is for triggering and playback of sounds, which is really important when you're dealing with music games. Very often when we're dealing with Fmod or Wise, a lot of the things that happen, say RTPCs and effects and whatnot, a lot of those things are tied to screen update, which in the best case scenario is going to be 60 frames per second. But if you really want to be musically exact, you don't want to be dealing with that sort of quantization. You want musically accurate, which means you need to be better than the 16 milliseconds that you're dealing with a screen update. You can tell if it's slightly on or slightly off. So they were making a big show of how our timing system is great when it comes to sample playback.
Interesting.
Now, lots of different types of music games are coming out of Japan for various platforms, especially for iOS. Lots of cool iOS games that people have way too much fun over. I honestly can't get into them, but it is really cool that people are doing these things and interacting with music in these ways.
I'm just, while we're on this point, just before we finish, I'm just having a look at the different licensing plans that they have. So the standard licensing program, let's see, wow, okay, that's pretty expensive. Oh no, wait. So if you have a budget, you have a budget under 10,000, 100,000 US dollars, then it's free, which is great. And if you go over that, there's either a one-time charge or 1% of gross sales. I don't know if those are the different plans or if that's together. But the important thing is for the smaller games, if your project is under 100,000 US dollars, or if it's non-commercial, then it's free, which is fantastic.
For a long time, it's just been the audio middleware, and then you would rely on your programmers to try to finagle it in there. But they recently have been testing out a plugin. So if you are a Unity developer, you're an audio developer working in Unity, now there is a beta of that you can try out. So that's pretty cool in terms of getting this technology out into a much wider field of developers.
Cool. I wonder where they are, actually. If they're close by, I should go and visit them and get a spiel, see if they can sell it to me.
Alex, how did those licensing terms compare to those of Fmod or Wise?
I think they're very competitive, because I believe with Fmod and Wise as well, it is free to use. Wise limits you to 200 assets. I think it was 200, maybe 200 original source samples, or that kind of limitation. Fmod, I believe, is also free under a certain budget ceiling, I believe. So yeah, it's very competitive. So
the 200 asset thing for Wise is kind of a big deal. I really like Fmod's licensing for low-budget games. The fact that it is free, the fact that it's not limited in terms of the number of events that you could put on there, I think makes it great. And now with CRI out there, in addition to Fabric as well, those are three really great audio middleware tools that you can try out. And for developers of lower budget games, you could say, hey, we can use this, it's totally free, and you got all this power in your hands now.
Yeah, I might have a look. Not that that I have any particular things that I'm dissatisfied with Wise, but it's always good to. One thing I found recently, it's always good to sort of change out your main tool that you use sometimes, because even if it's just experimenting, it gives you new ideas of different approaches to use with the main thing that you use, which I found because recently I've got Ableton Live, and so that's been fun playing with that, and then coming back into Renoise and realizing, I can actually do the same thing here, which is really easy in Live. It's a few more steps in Renoise, but I can do it here, and that gives you extra ideas. But anyway, that's a topic for another episode. So guys, we've come to the end of another show, so we would like to say a big thank you to Isotope for sponsoring the show. Thank you guys for participating. Thanks, Kyle, for being the big granddaddy of the whole thing. We're 2 episodes away from our centennial celebration, so it'll be great to have all of us there for that. And yeah, you know where to find us. Go to the Googs, search for Game Audio Hour. You'll find us on Twitter and Facebook and on YouTube. Subscribe, like, love, heart, favorite. Do what you like. We love it all. Fantastic.
Retweet.
Oh, there's that too.
Don't do the sad thing. Even though there's the sad thing in Facebook, please don't do that.
No, don't do that.
I hope we don't make you sad.
Yeah, you know, we aim to please, don't we, guys?
All the time.
All the time. All right. Thank you all, and we'll see you next time. Bye.